Oh
Hey
no.
everybody, just wanted to welcome you to the to the fifth episode of Martial Praxis podcast. I'm here with Tom. He's an author and a martial artist. He's done a lot of really incredible work. Maybe you could just start by telling us just a little bit about your background and in martial arts, and then also about the two series of books that you have.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Tom Billinge. I'm my my background in martial arts is that I started actually moderately late, as in I was in my early 20s. Actually, I got particularly into Muay Thai actually at the time. Um, And the reason I got into Muay Thai was that when I was at college, there was this guy who everyone kind of feared or respected to some degree. And they were like, he does Muay Thai. So I was like, okay, I need to know more about this thing that everybody seems to respect this guy immensely for and be kind of a little bit scared of him. And so I basically started Muay Thai initially on a trip to Thailand, and then actually coming back to my original hometown, which is Cambridge in the UK. And there I studied Muay Thai with a guy called Ryan Rudkin, who now lives in Singapore. He's part of the IFMA, which is the Federation of Amateur Muay Thai. Basically, he is a Brahmajan, which is the 13th Khan. So that's as high as anybody can be ranked within
So
Muay
did
Thai.
he train? Did he train in Thailand?
Yes, so he fought in Thailand and trained in Thailand. The reason that I started going to Jitty Gym in Thailand was because Ryan was a Jitty Gym guy. And now it's not called Jitty Gym. Now it's called Rit Gym. Still exists in Bangkok, but it was one of the original iteration of Jitty Gym was just off the Khao San Road, and it was one of the first Muay Thai gyms to allow foreigners.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah, because I
and
feel like there's quite a difference between sort of there's sort of a generic style of kickboxing that people teach and often will call Muay Thai, but then when you look at the people who are really trained in Thailand, there's actually a very different like flavor to it.
Yeah, and so actually, what's kind of fortunate for me was that England has a very traditional Muay Thai style because we've always had from pretty early on people going out there and bringing it back. So, like in England, there were pioneers of Muay Thai. This guy called Master Sken, who's a Thai guy up in Manchester, trained a lot of people. Tony Moore went out there in the 70s or 80s, like Ronnie Green. There was a bunch of guys that basically went to Thailand and trained there in the 70s and 80s, and so they brought that back. And so I was kind of fortunate in that regard that England
Yeah.
had like a pretty strong, fairly robust traditional Muay Thai scene. And by tradition, I don't mean like the Muay Baram, but like actually like
Yeah.
very much kind of Muay Thai without too much of the influence of kickboxing, really. Because actually, kickboxing was not that big in England compared to Muay Thai by the time I was training in the early 2000s.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So I started in Muay Thai and um, trained, fought a little bit. I wasn't very good at fighting. Much better at teaching. Uh, I guess my problem has always been like that real killer instinct.
Yeah.
I just in something like Muay Thai, when you're actually hitting each other, you have to kind of turn on that super mean
Yeah.
side of you. And while that sort of exists there, and it does exist there, I always found that kind of hard to access when I was like fighting. I don't
Yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
now maybe I could access it more strongly in my 40s than I could in my 20s for some reason. But
And coaching is it's a separate skill. I think something people don't realize, like there's a skill in a particular art, and then there's a skill of coaching, and there's a skill of competing. So they're all,
yeah,
I actually consider them to be just completely different skill sets that obviously if you specialize in one of them, you're going to get more out of that
yes.
than if you try to split the difference.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, the reality is that some people, when I train them, they're like I've got students who are extremely technical. They're fantastic at performing the techniques. They're fantastic at sparring. Even they're fantastic in that kind of not too hard pressure environment. But if I
Yes.
put them in a ring, they're going to struggle.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know, and then I've got other students who are just absolutely amazing at transmitting what they know to other students, you know. So there's different skill sets.
So how did you get from, training and doing Muay Thai into these like traditional systems of strength and conditioning? Because it seems like a little bit of a big jump.
Yeah, it kind of is. So I moved to Thailand long term because I met my wife out there. She's actually American. That's how I ended up in America. But I met her out there, moved there, and then lived in Asia for about 6 years, different parts of Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, China, Hong Kong. Traveled all over it. It was fantastic time, and I kind of got really interested in sort of esoteric traditions, spiritual traditions, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, like, you name it. I was extremely interested in those sort of metaphysical and philosophical ideas,
Yeah.
and
I think you're
then
the first person I've ever spoken to who was jazzed about Confucianism, but
yeah, a lot
I'm
of
going to do exactly what my
authoritarian,
parents and society wants me to.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're not going to meet many people who are stoked to hear about Confucianism. Oh yeah, great. Yes, the
I've actually
morally
read
good
before
man.
they have like special academic qigong exercises to try to make you smarter, and it's like this unique like Confucian
Oh, good.
thing. Yeah, they're like special
That's awesome.
things just to help you study better.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Just so you can memorize all of the classics.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
right. Yes, I mean that stuff was really interesting to me, and so then we left Asia and went to Europe for a short while, and then I was back and forth between the States and England, kind of. Then we decided I wanted to get my green card and settle over in the States, because I was married to my wife, my current wife, my only wife, but I like to introduce her as my current wife. I was sort of in between places, and as I was in between places, I suddenly discovered this guy called Paul Wolkowinski, who is one of the early guys for bringing the mace to the West. And
Yeah.
he's English, but he lives in Australia, and he's a wow. He must be knocking on 70,
Oh
70
wow.
something now. But he had all these videos on YouTube with like the steel mace and the Gada, and then him in India, and I was just like hooked. I was like, man, this is really, really interesting. Like this mace, because I've done kettlebells. I was kind of into those, and I wasn't really a big gym guy. I've
Yeah.
done like conditioning stuff when I was like uh, sort of more hardcore on the Muay Thai when I was younger, and like trying
Yep.
to really kind of grind something out. Um, but I was just like sort of fascinated by the Gada, by the mace, the traditional mace, and so and being someone who makes their own stuff, doesn't like to spend money on fancy equipment. Basically, I immediately made one according to his instructions, because I was like, I'm not buying a steel mace. I'm going to make one of these.
Yeah.
It's made of concrete and a stick in it, so it's got to be can't be difficult. And so I made one way too heavy, and so I had to make another one. And as soon as I got that first swing on that thing, and actually it went around, and it kind of went all the way around and came back to where it's meant to be, I was like, oh my god, wow, this is so cool. This is kind of just grabbed me, and then I sort of dive deeper into like, where's that from, and what is that
Yes.
all about? Like, because it's
Yeah.
like, what I did it because I thought it was cool, but then obviously it became very clear, like, yes, this is working things that as a martial artist I could really kind of understand. I kind of immediately had an instinctive understanding that this was something that would be beneficial to me,
Yeah.
um, in terms of sort of from a martial point of view. Um,
Absolutely.
and so I dug into it deeper and found that there was a whole system behind it, from India, called Vyayam, which is actually the basis of a lot of modern yoga. Some
Yes.
of modern yoga poses actually comes from the wrestling conditioning of
Yeah.
India, the Vyayam
100%.
system, which is so interesting. That when they were trying to construct a kind of systemized modern way of doing yoga, they looked to wrestling.
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize that modern yoga was systematized so late. Krishnamacharya, I think it was in like mid to late 1800s that he actually
Yeah,
put together the modern yoga system, and it really is his own like unique synthesis. It's not something that really even well reflects the tradition of hatha yoga before it. You know, it's like
No, absolutely
he
not.
took Ayurveda and these exercises from like gymnastic type things, and
Yep.
he sort of categorized everything according to the Ayurvedic stuff and found a way to sort of link it together. I mean, he was an incredible practitioner. I'm not knocking
Yeah.
anything that he did, but it's very new, and it's quite different from the older stuff, which actually, if you look today, bears more resemblance to like Tibetan Salung than it does to what you see in
Right.
modern yoga
There's
practice.
actually traditional yoga has a lot of very static positions for long lengths of time,
Yes.
and a lot more of the breathing aspect, the pranayamic stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, modern yoga as it is today, definitely it obviously has a grounding in spiritual and medical systems of India, but ultimately it draws from, like, I think it was called like Danish primitive gymnastics. There was like a
Yes.
European influence that came through the YMCA into India,
Yep.
and it draws from, the Vyayam system of the wrestlers. And I
Yes.
mean, the Surya Namaskar, which was really codified proper as we know it today in the 12-step. You call it the 12-step Surya Namaskar. Is a guy called the Raja of Aund. Because lots of these kind of Maharajas and Rajas were very interested in trying to build something along those lines.
Yep.
And so the Raja of Aund, in his book, simply puts that he took the dand from the dand, which is basically the Hindu push-up, as it's sometimes called in the West, from
Yes.
Vyayam, and made it as the basis of his Surya Namaskar. Simple as that. I mean, he just says it outright.
Yeah, I
Doesn't
think that
try and hide it.
there's also like a linguistic thing there that it's like the dand was like a punishment stick.
Yes,
So it was
punishment rod.
often
Yeah.
used by Krishnamacharya to punish like young Bhahabati Joyce and Iyengar when they were being too
Oh, that's
crazy,
cool.
like
Yeah.
Rajasic as little boys. He would be
Yeah.
like, okay, like do a million Chaturanga Dandasanas to
Yeah.
wear them out.
Right. I mean, that is exactly right. The dand does actually mean a punishment rod. So
Like a very specific stick. It's not just any stick.
no, it's the punishment one. So yeah, so I mean, I got very interested in that. That was just, because I'd also at that point, and when I just moved to the States too, was that I had just started jujitsu. So I came here, and I found in my area a gym, which is the gym I've ended up staying at, because it's just, well, everyone's gym's the best gym in the world, right? But like it was
Yes.
just like immediately I clicked into that gym. It was a great fit from day one.
Yeah.
And so I started there doing Muay Thai and kind of half teaching a little bit as they got to know me.
Yep.
Because you got to know somebody when you let them into your gym. You can't just be like, yes, come and teach classes now, Muay
Yeah,
Thai
absolutely.
teacher, So I was kind of like getting to know them, and it was like, okay, it's a 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu gym. It's a regular Jiu-Jitsu gym and a 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu gym. And I was just like, okay, I should probably try this, because it's like half of what they do here. It's more than half of what they do here.
Yeah.
So I started doing that, and again was just hooked into grappling. I was just like, this is it. It actually kind of grabbed me more than striking did when I first started striking. There was just something that really pulled me straight in, and so as soon as I figured out that the Vyayam systems for grapplers, and I was sort of getting into grappling, I just went into both kind of with equal gusto, basically.
Just dove in.
Yeah, just went for it.
Very cool. Can you like just for the listeners, like I'm pretty familiar. I've been to one of your workshops and I've read the hell out of the war yoga on the Vyayam. But could you just describe a little bit about what the system's like, some of the components of it, and the way
Of
the
course.
training is structured?
Of course. So Vyayam is a system for wrestlers for strength and conditioning. It's often performed during the morning session with wrestling done in the afternoon, or it can be mixed around. However, there's all sorts of ways. But traditionally in Varanasi, you'll often find them doing their conditioning in the morning and little bits of wrestling, maybe mostly wrestling in the afternoon. And so the conditioning starts off with body weight stuff, and it's very simplest level, it is body weight stuff. So it is the at the very basic level is dans, which are Hindu push-ups, betaks, which are Hindu squats, and sapates, which are Hindu burpees. And they're done in extremely high repetition. So, you'll get them doing 250 dans followed by 500 betaks, and just extremely high numbers, with numbers, historically sort of given as being 5,000 betaks in a day, which would leave you with very little day for anything else. But the idea is high repetition. And then on top of that foundation of body work, there is a set of different tools. The gada is a mace, a bamboo handle, and a stone head. They have jori, or mugda, which are wooden clubs.
Large clubs.
Yeah, big. The jori are very large clubs. Mugda is a single club, and it's different places use jori, different places use mugda. It depends on where you go. There are the samtola is like a sort of wooden log with two handles in it, a bit like a barbell. They use dumbbells. They call them dambal, and they were introduced much later, probably Victorian era, which are swung around. And they have like a garnal, which is a neck stone. It's a ring that you put on your neck, and then a nal, which is a lifting stone. But I would honestly say the garnal is probably the most iconic wrestling specific tool out of all of that.
They're
really
awesome. I actually had one when I was growing up as a kid. Like my parents owned like a martial arts school, and we had a nal. It was made of granite, so we used it for quite some time, and then one day somebody was doing push-ups with it on, and they just banged it on the floor too hard, and it broke, and I was devastated. But it just an amazing tool, like really, really cool thing.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is. And actually, they're very, I've put out like a PDF tool manual for people, because I just think, you can make a lot of this stuff yourself. So
yeah, absolutely.
There's no need to spend a fortune on going out and buying like fancy equipment. You can make it, just some concrete and like a little know-how, because I am not like I'm a kind of person who likes to make stuff himself and do it himself, but I'm not like an artist with it. I'm not like,
I think some of the information you give on that is really helpful, though, because there's certain little tricks that you figure out from doing it and making one and having it crack on you. Don't make it when it's too cold. Put a little wire in there, some cloth to keep it together. This type of stuff, I think, is really beneficial for people who want to do it, so they can go and do it their first time and have a reasonable amount of success without
right. Yeah, no, I had a lot of failures with concrete because I didn't really understand it. I just thought, you mix it. And I first started off making things with like quick setting concrete, and it was a disaster because it did set too quickly, and I couldn't get the mold right and get it in the mold properly. And so I ended up going to regular concrete. But yeah, and I found out that you shouldn't be doing it in the wintertime. That happened very quick. I realized that after a lot of things just crumbled on me. So yeah.
So it's very interesting to kind of compare and contrast what they have going on in this system with some of the modern strength and conditioning, especially because I've studied strength and conditioning for a long time, and I've seen the strength and conditioning world kind of go through many phases. It's a lot. It's very similar to, if you look at studies on like, is drinking red wine good for you, right? Like every couple of years they'll change their mind. Or coffee is another one. Static stretching, right?
Chocolate.
There's these trends that have gone on, and maybe around 2000 there was this movement towards functional fitness, where they wanted to replicate. It was the early like popularity of the UFC, and people wanted to replicate fighting and combat sports movements in their strength and conditioning. And recently, that in the 20 years since then, the strength and conditioning world really slid the other way, to the point where now most of the popular and serious coaches are advocating basically powerlifting and bodybuilding style training for combat sports athletes. And then just like in the last couple of years, there's a fellow by the name of Franz Bosch, who is he's someone who's been working to apply ecological dynamics and constraints-led approach to strength and conditioning. Who the guy is really, really, really like he's like a genius. His stuff is so intelligent, and good, but also sometimes very hard to comprehend it. Like there's certain things that
that's the case with people. That's often the case with people who are really intelligent.
it's taken me like months to figure out what he's talking about. But
right.
What he's begun to say is that there is no inherent quality of strength. You can be strong in a pattern of coordination. So you're strong at squatting, you're strong at deadlifting. It's not just strength. There's no such thing as strength. There's only strength coordination. And this is a really interesting viewpoint because if you develop the wrong, he calls them movement attractors. They're like it's like a state that you're drawn to based off of the way your body is coordinated to work. If you're drawn into these movement attractors for a squat or a deadlift or a bench press, as opposed to the movement attractors of your sport, then the strength and conditioning training can actually reduce your ability to perform in your sport, right?
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah,
it makes total sense.
To me, it seems like he's on the right track. He's not saying don't train. He's saying train in a way that's representative of the attractors that make someone good at your sport. And
right, because I mean, you all know about like the power lifter or the an old school like gym rat that'll come into your gym and start doing jiu-jitsu, and while they're strong, they're not strong in those positions. They're not strong to do what everyone else do. Yeah, okay, they can probably stand up and shake you off a little bit or something like that. But
even CrossFitters who have incredible like action capacity, incredible cardiovascular, and even like anaerobic threshold conditioning, they get completely gassed from doing actual grappling. So
right.
I think that with these traditional movement systems that you're getting closer to the attractors that are representative of actual grappling. And that's one of the big values of these types of things.
Well, I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of interesting. So right now I'm actually digging in to my research for the third War Yoga book, which is actually going to be about the ancient Greek stuff.
Yep.
And what I've noticed is there's a big crossover. I mean, so that book's going to try and focus a bit more on the actual combat side of things too, the combat sports side of things. But there's a big crossover in the exercises done in the ancient Greek palestra, which is the wrestling school, and the Indian akara. Like it's kind of spooky sometimes. Like the digging of the pit, the digging of the wrestling pit, and the significance given to that as an exercise is equally as emphasized in ancient Greece as it is in India. Because in India, like digging the pit is the first thing you do, but it's also, while it's functional, as in you dig in the pit to get it ready to wrestle in, it's also seen as being one of the most beneficial things you could possibly do for your body. And it's done with a sort of like a hoe, for want of a better word. But the ancient Greeks, and if you read physicians, people like Galen, believed the exact same thing, and they also believe that the earth itself has medicinal properties.
So I think this is also a really interesting aspect to these systems that I want to highlight is the integration between there's a level of the training that's physical, there's a level of the training that's I would call like mental. It's you could say mental or spiritual in the sense that
I agree.
It's focused on the development of certain mental qualities. I remember like this is one of the reasons behind these super high reps, which you see in like Sanskritic yoga traditions too. You go to accomplish a mantra, you have to do 100,000 or 1,000,000 repetitions of the mantra, and that's to develop this enhanced focus. And then also
Mehnat in India.
Yes. And then also there's a level of these traditions that have sort of like a symbolic or a sympathetic magic type aspect where there's a symbolism behind what you're doing that's designed to almost bolster those other aspects. So, what is the body? The body is the earth element. So by digging the pit and interacting with the earth element, you're going to make your body stronger.
Yes, right. As in the earth will make you strong, which is a very famous Indian wrestling quote, Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting is that by the time within the Greek context, it developed for a very long time. I mean, there was 1,000 years of the sacred games with the combat sports in them, unbroken. But within that time frame, and probably and obviously before as well, the medical sciences got involved. And so a lot of what was sort of the traditional medicines of Greece developed actually out of the palestra and the gymnasium, that these sort of exercises and foods
Yes.
and things that you put in your body and the things you put on your body and the things you do with your body ultimately have a health effect, which
We see
while
this
that
even in
sounds
modern times, right? That
right.
out of the need of athletes to keep up with their body and try to make themselves stronger, we discover a lot of things that you
Right.
otherwise, you sort of, there's nobody like combat sports athlete to sort of leave no stone unturned. So they'll
Yeah.
basically try anything. Like, oh,
Right.
spray this
Yeah.
stuff on your legs and you'll be stronger. So even in like the Chinese traditions, there's a whole world of Ditta Jiao that is for injuries. It's for other purposes other than the how do you say just dealing with like iron palm. Like it
Yeah.
started out being for iron palm, and then now you have it for injuries and all types of other things.
Right. I mean, I actually went to the Shaolin Temple when I lived in China, and I bought a bottle of the liniment there, and unfortunately, it got taken off me because it didn't fit in my hand luggage on my flight back to the other part I lived in China. So I was kind of annoyed about that. But yeah, that's kind of interesting because exactly right. That starts as something in the context of a kind of a holy place where there's martial arts happening and the medicine happens because of the martial arts, but then that medicine then gets seen as being something more broadly used for all sorts of other things that are beneficial to other people.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's kind of an amazing little process there.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious because you're on your third
Yes.
the War Yoga books now. If you
Yeah.
could just compare and contrast the systems a little bit, because you also have this system coming out of Iran, which
Yes.
seems on the surface to be quite similar to some of the Indian stuff, but with
Yes. It
some
is.
unique aspects and some differences.
Yeah. So the Indian wrestling school is the Akara, and that's an outdoor place, and it's an individual kind of practice in the sense that the the exercises are done individually and as an individual. And Iran has a system that seems very similar on the surface. It's called Varzesh i Pahlavani, which means the heroic sport, and it's performed in the Zurkhane, which is a house of strength. That's what it means, or house of power. Actually, the word zur and the the Hindi word jaw are the same root. It means force because they call rolling, like practice wrestling, is called jaw in India, and zur means strength or force in Iran.
And
They're all linked through.
tradition in Iran is more associated historically with Zoroastrianism and some of those practices than necessarily with the Muslim world, or has it kind of shifted as
Mm.
the
Well,
practices
it's kind of
changed?
a mix. I think the Zurkhane comes out of ultimately a form of the early religion, Mithraism,
Ah,
which specifically highlights the god Mithra. So
yeah,
Ahura Mazda is the main god of Zoroastrianism, but Mithra is like his counterpart god. In India, it's Mitra and Varuna, and
yes,
in
yes,
Iran, it was Ahura and Mithra,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
Mithra is a kind of god of the warriors. He's a god of contracts, ultimately, is what his original meaning is, but he comes to be associated very much with warriors. And so a Mithraic temple was often a cave or a cavern, an enclosed space. And the Zurkhane is also very similar. It's a kind of a cavern, but made by a man-made cavern. Um, and so this, I believe, goes back to originally to the Mithraic period, where the warrior caste of Iran were practicing their martial traditions, and then what happened was it developed over time, cross-pollinated with India, especially during the Mughal period, where a lot of Persian and Iranian wrestlers went over to India and interacted as court wrestlers, and so that's why in Maharashtra, which is Western India, they call an akara a talim because it's a Persian word, a Farsi word. It comes from talim khane, which means a house of instruction. So it then gets called into a talim, and they also have some tools that are a little bit more similar, like a shena board and a kind of steel bow, which is called a lazim, which has now died out completely in India. It doesn't exist. I've never seen one outside of like tiny little wooden thing used for dancing, which is what it developed into somehow. But there's this sort of tradition, and what happened was that when the Iranians were banned from using weapons and training in martial arts by the Turkic rulers, the Seljuks, when they took over in the 12th century or something like that. And while they did that, they basically took their training underground into what was a sort of proto-Zurkhane. And over time, it developed into this thing where it's synthesized with Islam, with Sufism specifically. So you have a man singing these sort of hymns and telling tales from epics like the Shahnameh, which is the epic of the hero Rostam. And so it's basically a group training session where they swing clubs, they do push-ups, they do a lot of like body weight exercises, something that's called Namesh, which is like warm-ups, but it's more than warm-ups. It's like very aerobic, and traditionally it would end with wrestling. And it has what's called a goad, which is this sunken level they all do their training in. And that would originally be an earthen pit. So it's, again, a development of the wrestling pit into something more elaborate. And so really what happened was the Iranians, through a sort of evolution of their own system, made it into a very elaborate, very systematized, very fixed group activity, but because the idea was to train as a group, like a band of soldiers would train together as a group.
It's super interesting that it became associated with Sufism. It makes sense because you kind of have in India it being associated sort of with the yoga tradition in some ways, right? And then that's the mystical, more focused on practice and this idea of progressive development towards something as opposed to just the outer form of the religion, right? And then you have the same thing in Iran, where it's become associated with the Sufis, who have the same sort of outlook. In fact, there's actually a lot of papers I read recently about Sufi yogis, that there was actually quite a strong tradition of these. They would call them jogis. So it's interesting that connection. It's pretty fascinating.
Well, it's also that kind of interesting idea that ultimately, when you look at any exoteric religion and you go to the esoteric side of it, that there's so much in common through the esotericism. That esotericism ultimately finds this sort of universal truth, this path, which is a path of self-personal spiritual development, and that can be attained through various different methods, but ultimately it all boils down to the same. There's a very famous Chinese proverb, I think it's something along the lines of, there are many paths to the top of the mountain, but the view is the same. And so it's kind of the same with those esoteric traditions, that and really there's kind of almost two paths on that esoteric trajectory. It's either a sort of contemplative, purely meditational path, or a path of action, which is ultimately a path of taking action, doing something active, and attaining the same spiritual realizations.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I studied Western Hermetics for quite some time, and there's some very interesting connections here between that stuff. Like you have the path of the serpent, and then the straight path, right? Like where you kind of try to climb the tree of life just through contemplative action, and it's considered to actually be the more difficult of the two, rather than the sort of back and forth path that winds your way through the various spheres and elements.
Right.
And it also seems there seems to be at the center of all of these traditions this emphasis on the sun, right? As an archetype and a symbol, that this sun is something very important to be attained. Maybe not the last attainment, but it's central to the whole system.
Yeah, it's that which illuminates. It's sort of like, so, I mean, the sun are also, I mean, ultimately in a lot of ways it respects it. It represents like a death and rebirth. And spiritual rebirth. As the sun sets, it always rises again, and there's a moment at which, and it's sometimes, in alchemy, it's called the black sun, the negredo. But there's a point at which the sun is invisible, but it's still there, in the darkness of the night, and that's actually where the transformation occurs that then allows the light to come back again and conquer the darkness.
And I think that that's something that there's something really important there, that I was noticing listening to your book, the other series. I think the first one's Undying Glory.
Yes, yeah.
And all of these Greek heroes, they all start with some like endowment, right, of deityhood. They have
Yeah.
this nature that was given to them because they're Zeus's son, or
Right.
they have this power, right? But then their journey always starts in a place of sort of being set back. They have this great setback that they have to do penance for. And I think there's something very powerful about that narrative, especially it's something that I think speaks to a lot of martial artists, in the sense that you start jujitsu or you start Muay Thai and you suck. You're getting your ass kicked by everyone. And there's this period that you have to go through of basically penance, where you're just losing and losing and losing and losing to reach this point of competency where at the very least what's going on is illuminated, right?
Yeah. Right. No, correct. Absolutely right. It's a really good comparison, because and something like jujitsu or like a complex grappling art is it really shows you that, because you're going to suck for a really long time on the whole, compared to like a striking art where you can feel like, oh, I can hit someone now. But yeah, and you have to basically go through that period of suffering, and suffering ultimately is a transformative thing, because if you can embrace that, if you can say, okay, it's okay to suffer, and it's okay for things to be difficult, and it's okay for me to not feel comfortable or happy in the situation, and ultimately shed those kind of feelings and just say, yeah, that's fine, this is fine, that's when you actually start to gain good insight, good understanding. That's when you start to learn. When you can sit there and have a 250-pound dude on your chest crushing you, and you just sit there and, to begin with, that you just want to tap immediately when you first start. But later on, once you've sort of understood what's going on and you've allowed that, you've just accepted it, it's fine. You can sit there and, okay, I can breathe, I can move a little bit here, and I can, and suddenly it becomes, okay, I can breathe, I can move a little bit here, I can figure out how I can get my arm through underneath here or something. I mean,
you start to actually perceive what's happening in the exchange, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of the signal that you've sort of come out of the Negredo, you've come out of the Dark Knight, right? And now you stepped out into the sun. You can see, okay, this is what's happening in this particular exchange. And I also think that this is huge for it. It's so interesting because I think the problem with the path of action, so to speak, is that sometimes people will go through all of the motions and do all of the things, but they don't have the personal development doesn't happen for whatever reason. If at any point you sort of split off and you don't keep these three elements, right? The symbolic element, you're not paying attention to the symbolism, you're not paying attention to that sort of almost Jungian realm where you're trying to understand what these things represent, what they mean to you. If you stop doing the mental development or you stop doing the physical development, you can sort of go through the motions without having the development, right? But I do think that where it really works is that with these systems, the people who designed them, they were seeing how the wrestling or the physical exercises, because it seems like groups sort of specialized, that
they do, although I think to their detriment ultimately. I think having them connected is actually where the real magic is.
Yeah. So I think they said, okay, you know what? These things are a perfect allegory for the journey of personal development. We should use them as as tools to accomplish a sort of like a reenactment of this hero's journey, so to speak.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what. So I mean, the three ways in which the sort of, sometimes called the vertical transmission, but like the divine information, divine knowledge basically manifests for humans is there is ritual, myth, and symbol. And so myth is the story, which always is, the thing, something that is always true. I believe Sallust wrote the Roman write a solastroke. These things never happened, but they always are.
Yes.
And that's kind of myth. Myth conveys that which is always true rather than history, which changes and depends on what's going on. Symbol is the sort of most fine and subtle transfer of information that, you see it and you immediately understand what it means, but you have to actually be kind of receptive to the symbol and understand it. And ritual is the reenactment of the divine story. And so those three things kind of also can be manifested through that physical path. That
Yeah.
the myth is the story that drives the ritual. And the ritual in this case is the physical action. You are taking physical action, you're reenacting the divine story, the divine truths. Yes. And that will then reveal symbols to you as you go through the process. And that's what's going to give you sort of spiritual realization or mental.
And where I think people lose it is in, you have to maintain your concentration on understanding the symbolism of what you're doing. And if that concentration breaks, then the ritual becomes meaningless action.
Right. And it just becomes, yeah, exactly right. It just becomes just action for action's sake, which, I mean, if you look at it through the lens of mythology again, action without any meaning is essentially Titanic, which is the old gods before the Olympian gods. And they're just like these sort of big, strong, but immoral gods who just dominate through power but have no higher purpose or higher meaning to them, whereas the Olympians come in because they do have higher
and I think that's what you're at risk of becoming if you embark on these sort of, especially with martial arts. I think there's a danger, right, of if you go through this journey and you develop this power, right, you have this power over other people, you can hurt them,
you do.
And you develop yourself, but you're not doing that spiritual development. You're not doing that character and that personal development, that you basically become Titanic, like, as you said.
Right. Exactly.
You end up without this higher purpose and you're disconnected from it, and the power becomes unwieldy and dangerous. I think of a similar
extremely dangerous
thing in Indian mythology too, right? With the asuras.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the Iranians flip Ahura and the Devas the other way around, but ultimately, yes, the idea of gods and anti-gods.
Yes.
And that's ultimately the Greek Titans and Olympians, is that there's the quote unquote good gods, or the gods, and then there's the angry gods, or the violent gods. And so, that's ultimately that Titanic element, that absolute power without any kind of moral or higher development behind it. And it's right, in the martial arts, I think it's critical that you develop personally alongside it. And I think most people do to some degree. And those who don't tend to get weeded out pretty quickly because, I mean, I guess it depends on the gym culture you're in. I guess there are some gyms where the culture isn't so great, but
what I've noticed is among the average practitioner that I do believe there's a lot of personal development going on.
I agree.
The place where it starts to get a little confusing is weird is at the higher levels of the combat sports. I think that there's almost like a 50-50 split of people who made it through the path and underwent lots of personal development, and they've become a pretty genuine, decent person. And then there's also like these titans who don't behave themselves, don't act right.
And you actually see that a lot more in professional combat sport, actually.
Yes, exactly.
And especially in the United States. Because, I mean, you look at, for example, MMA in Asia, like One Championship, it fosters this idea of warrior spirit and humility and all those sort of things, which should go along with the martial arts, that like they're part of the development, the personal development martial arts. Whereas in the States, like there's definitely been a sort of Titanic version of it, which has come out of, the kind of boxing hype that then turned into the MMA hype, which is like, I'm the greatest, I'm so great, I'm going to just kill everybody, I'm going to destroy everybody in front of me. And it's a very Titanic mindset, actually. I think you're right.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think it gives people the wrong impression of what martial arts are about and what goes on in the journey, even though the majority, like I said, of people that I train with and I know have become better, nicer people through training. They've actually achieved this, right? But
I actually find it hard to comprehend somebody not developing personally, because just for me and all the people that I encounter, they do. And so and again, I mean, I'm not hanging out with, many like, super high level, combat athletes in the professional realm. It's not the realm I'm in. I've met a few, of course, over the years. But I, again, come from a Muay Thai background, and Muay Thai is a sport where even at the very highest levels, humility is expected, and it is part of the game, like respect to, and all these things that you kind of go along with. I mean, if you go to a Muay Thai fight, almost anywhere in the world, you will never find somebody trash talking another person.
Yeah.
I've never heard it, and even when someone like Raymond Deckers was in Thailand killing people, like after his first year, he got destroyed every fight. And then after that, he started just chopping his way through the top Thai guys. But at the end of the day, even though he came from a completely different background, which was Dutch style kickboxing, and it kind of transferred into Muay Thai, he still came in, and Dutch style kickboxing, super tough. They
Yeah,
spar
no, it's a
hard.
great
They
style.
spar
Yeah.
like they're fighting, But he went in and, he was a brutal fighter, but he showed respect beforehand, respect afterwards, and as a character, he was nothing like what a professional, an equivalent professional fighter may be in some other kind of combat sports at the highest
Yes.
levels.
No, absolutely. And one thing I would pose to you as a question is, you see these ritual elements in all martial arts, and it's interesting in the context of this conversation because these ritual elements ultimately are, in my opinion at least, they're there to bolster this personal development. They're
Yeah.
symbolic acts, and even in jiu-jitsu where we have very little of this stuff, we still slap bump before we roll, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's a signal. It says, okay, now we're beginning the consensual violence.
Yes. Right.
These things are important. um do you think that there's things from these traditions that you've studied that you think could bolster these aspects in martial arts practice, even coming from Muay Thai, like something like the Y Crew, right? Like, I'm curious how
Yeah.
you feel like these things
Yeah.
are
That's fantastic. That's a
deserve a
really good
better
question.
place or a bigger place.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, yeah. I mean, the thing is, obviously, in a Western context, some of the sort of devotional guru stuff obviously goes by the wayside, and it just doesn't really suit the Western
Yeah,
mind.
that's not going to stick.
But the idea of so, for example, with the Zurkhane, and in the same in the Akara as well, is there's a definite moment where you enter into the sacred space, into the space and you mark that. And so in the Zurkhane, they ask permission from the Morshed, the person who's in charge of the Zurkhane, to enter into the goad before they go, and they just shout out Roksat, which means permission. And he says, for Sat, yes, come in. And so what they do is they come in, and what they do is they kiss their lip, they touch the ground, and then bring their fingers to their lips and kiss their lips. And then they start moving around doing the exercises. But it's ultimately, rather than exactly that thing, taking a moment to kind of acknowledge that you've now stepped out of like the outside world, you stepped out of mundane life, and you're actually into ultimately a space that is outside of time and space, at least for your purpose of what you're doing, would be
Yeah.
a really powerful way of kind of beginning your practice.
Yeah, I think that Carl Jung does a really good job of taking, like sort of a survey of different traditions, looking at all these different religions and mythologies, even looking at stuff from the West and saying, okay, what's the underlying structure behind this? And I feel like that's sort of what you're suggesting in a sense with this, is that we look at these traditions and say, okay, they do this ritual here. What's the purpose of that?
Yeah.
What purpose does this serve, and how can we kind of take that out and get the essence of it without
Yes.
having to do the same actions, which when taken from another culture, if
Yeah.
you don't have knowledge of the whole culture and you just have
Yeah.
people doing it, it's going to be meaningless.
It's meaningless, and kind of it can end up looking a bit crass actually in some
Yeah,
regards.
like it could be almost like cultural appropriation type
Yeah,
of.
it just becomes you've taken this thing without understanding. But yes, you're right. You have to sort of refine down to the essence of the meaning of what is being done, why and what's the true essence of it. Is the right word, essence, and then take that as a lesson and build it into a context which actually makes sense, in a context that people understand in what you're doing and where you are in time and space.
There's something you touched on earlier about alchemy that I've been kind of toying with for a long time. There's this book called the Alchemical Body by David Gordon White, and it's mostly about siddhas
Okay.
and
Yeah.
about various ways that they try to achieve immortality
Yeah.
in this very traditional like hatha yoga pre-Krishnamacharya
Yeah.
type
I've
stuff.
read it. It's a good book. I have
Yeah,
read
I
it a long
really
time ago. I
I,
can't remember.
I've read it like 3 times. I really
Yeah,
love
he's
it.
really excellent. He's really excellent.
um, and that book actually inspired like a long period of practice for me that I almost could say like never really ended, where I started trying to use phases to transform my body. So taking a phase to clean the body out, like clean it of all toxins and all,
Yeah.
try to get as lean and as clean as possible. And then a phase where I was sort of adding things to the body to try to make it bigger and stronger. And then a
Yeah.
third phase where I would try to integrate all of these qualities and kind of mix them together.
Yeah. That's an
And
alchemical process right there.
exactly, yeah. And only recently have I really started to look at like sort of weight training and really try to understand, strength and conditioning in a very technical sense. And I actually realized that when people do what's called like linear periodization, that there's this very strong connection between that and alchemy in the sense that
Yeah.
you
That's
take these
interesting.
big blocks of time and you take a period and you do general preparation where you just try to make the body stronger. And
Right.
then there's this second period where you're sort of transitioning between that general preparation and doing your sport primarily as you peak for a competition. And I think that it's especially in that second period where this style of training is really, really powerful because it allows you to build the capacity of your body to do lots and lots and lots of training in a way that's very close to the training. So I'm
Yes.
really thinking about utilizing it. It's interesting. My Chinese wrestling coach, he lives. He used to live in Inner Mongolia in China, but now
I
he's
know.
been
Yeah, I know
staying
who
in.
he is actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's been staying in Mongolia, and I have a lot of correspondence with him. And one of the interesting things is he's been training with this coach now who manages everything for them. He has them do their weight training too, and it's much closer to this style of training. Like they're doing hundreds and hundreds of just curls, right?
Yeah.
Like all different styles of pummeling and curls, but
Yeah.
and
That's interesting.
and I'm like, wow, like even as far out as Mongolia, you
Yeah.
have this. And if you look at Soviet style training, if you look at the what goes on in like Dagestan and Chechnya, those areas, right? It's similar. It's the same
Yes.
mindset, and it's very different than what you get in the West. So
Oh,
I've been
yeah.
working on kind of integrating this into my training and adding it as a supplementary method. But I want to ask you, how would you recommend that, like, you have a jujitsu athlete or anybody who does martial arts, like how could they start to integrate some of this stuff into their training?
Yeah. Good question. So, if I would say that the best thing to do is to examine the sort of exercises in front and see which ones you think, first of all, would be of most benefit to you. I would suggest immediately the body weight things first because they considered that to be building a foundation. I also do that. If you can do, and body weight ultimately is extremely beneficial because you're able to do a lot of reps. You're able to build up ligaments and tendons and elasticity into the body, in a way that.
Yes.
So, for example, I actually after being in Greece recently, I came back with a pretty bad knee, and so I just started Betax, and within a day it felt better. It's
The
working the ligament.
original knees over toes, right?
Right, exactly, right. And actually, I got that because I saw a guy in India who hit himself with a guru. He hit himself with a gadda by accident in the knee, and so his first reaction was to throw the gadda down and start doing Betax, and his knee got better very quickly. I would say, start with body weight things and integrate them daily. Actually, the body weight. I mean, especially in the morning, it's very good. It kind of wakes you up anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
Betacs are easy to do anywhere you want. Just sort of squat and start kind of going
Yeah.
for it. Um,
And they have
and
an
then,
amazing blood flow component. Like
Oh yeah,
They're fantastic for you. You get like an incredible pump in your lower body, which has a lot of like medicinal healing qualities
yeah.
to it to increase the blood flow like that.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, there's obviously a reason why as soon as that guy injured himself, the first thing he did was start doing Betax, just get that blood into there and get it going, and it'll feel better, and it did. And so yeah, I would say that doing those like body weight exercises is the first step, and to do them on a reasonably regular basis. If you can't do it every day, do it every other day. But I recommend at least doing something like that to some degree every day, very early in the morning, is a good way of doing it because you can just get up while you're waiting for your coffee to go. You can just pop out a bunch of squats, a bunch of Betax,
Yeah,
and then I would once you have the time and the inclination to make some tools, is make a gather
yeah,
first and foremost, a gather, and if you and potentially a garnal, but you can also use for a garnal like chains and things like that. But the important thing is to have it on the neck, and those
yes,
will integrate immediately into grappling.
absolutely. Yeah,
But I mean, with something like those weighted exercises, I wouldn't. I mean, a GADA, when I first started, I was doing it every day because I kind of get a bit obsessive. But you don't need to do the weighted work every day.
yeah,
But I would do the body weight every day. So,
yes, yes,
the Garnal, do it once or twice a week, a couple of times a week, GADA a couple of times a week, maybe if you want. Some of the other tools are harder to get hold of, like the Jory and the Samtola, but you can use substitutes like Sandbag for a very, very stuffed sandbag, or a barbell. Actually, you can use a light barbell. You can use for a Samtola to some
huh.
degree as well. So there's other alternatives you can use, but I would start with the body weight, do that daily, add the tools over time as you kind of get used to them, but particularly the Gadra and the Garnal, I'd say, a key from the
Key to
Indian
start
stuff,
with.
you know. So yeah, that's
Excellent.
what I would suggest.
No, that's phenomenal advice, man. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. This was great.
My pleasure.
I
Thanks for the
think we'll probably have to
conversation.
do a part two. There's still a whole bunch of
There's a lot to
stuff
talk about.
that we didn't get to,
It's
but
rare for me as well to be able to get talking to somebody who actually understands what I'm talking about. So I mean, I
no,
appreciate
I think there's a lot
conversation.
of important stuff here that is sort of it's there in these martial traditions, but it goes unnoticed. And I think
Yeah,
putting it on spotlight is really really important. You know,
I agree. I agree. I mean, I hope that the work I do is really just to put it out there, and I hope that other people will kind of take it and go and kind of run with it.
absolutely. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.